Welcome from lunch, everybody. I know some of you have just sitting down with your lunches. Hopefully you've had the time to connect with some new people, enjoy the food, and hopefully you're having a great experience so far. In the interest of time, we're going to pick up with our luncheon conversation. And so thank you all for taking a moment to focus in on this discussion. For those that joined us last night at the gala, and for those that were not there, we had a wonderful speaker, Dana Perino, former press secretary under George W. Bush. And I think she brought to light 2 out of the 3 features we're talking about today. She talked about the importance of being yourself and your willingness to be vulnerable, and how authenticity is one of the most valued traits. She was talking about that among the leaders that she's worked with in the past, including past presidents. And she talked about that as some personal values and traits that she feels very strongly about today. So it was a great introduction to kind of why we're doing this lunch conversation. As some of you may know, those that have been here before, we've tried to find ways to introduce really interesting dialogue. We go through some very serious topics throughout the course of the summit. This is always a nice opportunity at a luncheon discussion like this to kind of hit the pause button and say, we talk a lot about structure, process, corporate performance, ethics, compliance, things that we're focused on in our day-to-day. And it's nice to take a moment to hit the pause button and focus on the really, kind of the really human side of doing business, and that's talking about people and talking about the unique attributes that they bring into the workplace, bringing their whole selves to work and things of that nature. So we're very excited to have 2 people on this session that spend a lot of time thinking about this. We have Len Shen, who's the Chief Compliance Officer from Visa, and we have Heidi Brown, the author of the current book, The Introverted Lawyer, which we have here, and the upcoming book, right there, Untangling Fear in Lawyering. Both are admitted introverts on the panel, so we're going to get through this as best we can. But I'll go back to the book for a second. We bought limited copies of The Introverted Lawyer. There's a lot of us here, but unfortunately we only have 100 copies. So it's first come, first served. And during the networking break later this afternoon, Heidi's going to be available to sign copies of the book. And so her small booth and table with all the copies of the book is going to be towards the front of the exhibit hall. So please, if you'd like a copy of the book, don't fight. Calmly proceed to the table, and she will be happy to meet you and sign her publication. So thank you. At this time, I'd like to hear a little bit more about them. And Heidi, we could turn to you first.
Sure. So in the spirit of vulnerability, if you looked up the word introversion in the dictionary, you'd probably see a picture of me hiding behind a potted plant. So law school many decades ago, I was a very introverted, quiet student, and I also was grappling with extreme public speaking anxiety. I loved the research and writing aspect of law school, but to be quite honest with you, the performance aspects really gave me a hard time. Even speaking in class, doing oral arguments, I really was struggling, and I thought, am I the only one for whom this is challenging? And the advice that I got from well-meaning mentors at the time was the age-old, fake it till you make it. Just do it. Everybody's nervous, no big deal. If you're not nervous, it means you don't care. So I was trying to internalize all of that not so sound advice, but I kept feeling like there was something really wrong with me, that this was a weakness or a flaw that I had to somehow hide in case someone would out me as an imposter. So I ended up landing a high-paying job in a really aggressive, hard-hitting construction litigation firm right outside DC. And for the next 15 years, I was trying to fake it till I make it. I was feeling kind of ill before every deposition, negotiation, every mediation, every courtroom appearance. And I worked in 3 different law firms over that time period, and I have to say they were not the most forward-thinking in terms of mental health and well-being at the time. But I kept trying to fake it, and it wasn't working. None of that advice was helpful to me, and I was struggling throughout that entire 15-year time period. I transitioned to teaching law, and as I kept walking into my classrooms, I realized, wow, my most insightful, creative problem solvers, my most thoughtful legal writers, my most caring about the deep issues affecting us in the legal world were my quietest students and my most fearful students of the performance aspect. So that's what really got me thinking, what can we do to fix this? Because we're trying to force every quiet, scared person to be an extrovert, just do it. And it just wasn't working. So that's what led me to research for my own purposes, introversion, shyness, and social anxiety, and also how we can amplify our voices authentically when we need to. And then I started researching fear, and that's what led me to the 2 books.
Thanks, Eddie. And Leonard, over to you.
Sure. So I guess I have a slightly different but analogous trajectory. So I had very unwillingly became a lawyer and actually had a crossroads just coming out of law school, trying to decide whether I should either go into a small boutique law firm, which sort of matched my introversion, or else go into the Justice Department and be a trial lawyer. So I threw myself into the more painful course and became a prosecutor, spent some time in 10 years actually in DC, both in the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Justice Department, on EPA and Capitol Hill. Eventually made my way into private practice and into the private sector, where I worked as an environmental litigator for about 15 years or so. Then I made a career switch to compliance back in 2003. And in fact, I see some familiar faces in the room that I've seen over time. And I've been, over the past 16 years, the Chief Compliance Officer for GE Commercial Finance, for American Express, for PayPal, and for Visa. So I think for me, the trajectory has been going from sort of a very technically oriented, introverted person to having to become more of a leader who would have to influence not only my team, where I was leading hundreds of people, but also the broader company. And I think all of you are in these situations as compliance officers. We don't get a lot of clout necessarily. We don't have the bottom line as being the sort of spear that drives our influence forward. We have to somehow develop the leadership skills, notwithstanding our own introverted or mixed personalities, and really influence the broader organization. So hopefully bring to today's conversation 3 or 4 tips that we've developed over the years that I think will be helpful for all of us in our jobs as compliance people.
Great, thank you. And before we get to those tips and further into the dialogue, we have something we want to try. And Leonard is a practitioner of mindfulness. Mm-hmm. And we've got a quick little exercise, I think, to help get everyone in the right state of mind and comfortable in your chairs. You all look very comfortable now, but I think we can do better. And Len is going to lead us into a little bit of a demonstration, a little bit of an exercise, if you will.
Great, thank you. So first question, how many people have heard of mindfulness or do meditation? Okay, fantastic. So this is actually something I knew nothing about 5 years ago. But the reason why I wanted to talk about it in this segment is that it's one of the most important aspects of allowing myself, at least, and my team members to be really effective professionally. So what I'll do is teach you, just very briefly in about 5 minutes or so, a simple mindfulness meditation that's actually used by the military, by first responders around the country, and if those of you who are with companies that practice this, Aetna, Google, Goldman Sachs, there are a variety of companies around the country here that have really formal mindfulness programs, and so I'm going to sort of bring you into this. First, what we'll do is just sort of close your eyes and sit up straight in your chair. Make sure that your soles of your feet are flat on the ground and your sort of square body. So you don't have to be tense about it. In fact, it's the opposite. You just sort of relax and think of a little string pulling the top of your head slightly up, but not being military. Just sort of sit erect and stack your shoulders directly over your hips if you can. So sort of sitting squarely. Close your eyes and just sort of, first just take stock of your body. Just feel, where is there any sort of buzzing or tension or anything that's uncomfortable in your body? Maybe just sort of scan from head to toe. What does the inside of your head feel like? What are your ears, the front of your face? Just sort of sense the air against your skin there. And then slowly start working down your neck and your shoulders. Shoulders, are they tense? Are they hunched? Maybe relax them. Let them sink down towards the ground. And maybe start thinking about a nice warm caramel pouring down over your head and draining down over your shoulders and down your body, coursing into the ground, and carrying with it all the tension or uneasiness or buzzing straight down through your feet into the earth. And continue feeling the body moving down your torso, your chest, your back. Looking for anything that's blocked or uncomfortable, letting that caramel just drain through it. Now your stomach, your intestines, your pelvis, your hips. Drain down through your thighs, your lower legs, to your feet. Now you can start taking some slow, deep breaths. Inhale, your belly goes out like a balloon. And then exhaling, your belly goes back in, and it presses just gently against your spine. So concentrate on your belly, going out, filling up like a balloon, at your own pace, whatever feels comfortable for you. And inhaling, exhaling now back into the spine. And as you do that, continue to be aware of your body. Again, you can start with your head, your shoulders. Just drain all that tension, any worries you have outside of this room. Just drain them down through your spine, through your hips, through the soles of your feet. Continue monitoring your body anywhere that feels a little tense or buzzy or out of sorts. As you exhale, bring the caramel down through that and drain it into the ground. Just gently inhaling and exhaling at your own pace. A nice deep breath. Exhaling. And maybe as you exhale, you might even want to sigh audibly. As you sigh, you'll feel your whole body settle down into your chair. So just monitor your body a little bit, going back always to the breath. Inhaling and exhaling. Now we're going to count to 4 as you inhale. We're going to hold it out for 4. Exhale for 4, hold it out for 4. So, beginning, inhaling for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Holding breath. 2, 3, 4. Exhaling. 2, 3, 4. Holding out. 2, 3, 4. Inhaling, 2, 3, 4, holding, 2, 3, 4, exhaling, 2, 3, 4, holding out, 2, 3, 4. Continue at your own pace. Count of 4, what feels comfortable for you. Okay, now just come back into the room slowly. Don't open your eyes yet. Just sort of feel your fingers in your feet. And then at your own pace, you can let your eyes flutter open. Return to the room. So what you've done just now, again, is something that first responders use to deal with stress. And what happens is that as you exhale and you're pressing back into your spine, you're actually activating one of the largest nerves in the body, the vagus nerve. And that is the one way that we know of consciously being able to trigger the parasympathetic system that relaxes the body. It slows respiration, slows heart rate, reduces cortisol levels, the stress hormone. And when the cortisol levels reduce, then all of a sudden your synapses, your brain works more efficiently. Because when your neurons are bathed in cortisol and stress, the dendrites that are between the cells will suddenly contract. And all of a sudden, there's more space from nerve cell to nerve cell that makes it more difficult for you to think, for there to be transmissions across the nerve cells. When you do the deep breathing, you trigger the vagus nerve, the parasympathetic system gets going, then all of a sudden the dendrites between your neurons flourish again. You're closer to each other. You can think more clearly. You don't have the deer in the headlights feeling of stress. So that's a little bit of the science and biology behind this, but meditation, even this very simple exercise, has been shown by 20 years of studies and literature to be a fundamental way to reduce stress and build physiological resilience in your brain. There's more gray matter in the parts of the brain that allow you to be more resilient and less reactive to stress. And so I was saying earlier that, for example, Hillary Clinton in the Benghazi hearings says that she went into just 15 minutes of meditation in the breaks because that was the way that she was able to reduce the stress to be able to deal with what was going on in the hearing room. So something that I would commend to all of you to consider, to look into a little bit more for yourselves, but it's a fundamental way to physiologically change your body's reaction, to be less reactive, and over time to be much more resilient to stress.
Thank you very much. And I think everyone in the room is so accustomed to moving so fast and dealing with the pace of business. It's rare we have the opportunity to do that unless you're a practitioner that does this, is make it part of your life and part of your goals. It's a good reminder to press the pause button. And I think we thank you, and you had me at caramel. I think that was
That
great.
always works.
We might have caramel with our donuts later, and that's a whole different discussion on wellness. But we talk a lot about wellness, I think, one, because it's in the corporate lexicon. It's becoming more important, and wellness means a lot of different things. We're talking about it at Ethisphere, even. For those, we've got practitioners of yoga and people very serious about their meditation and doing what they can to be just, their better self. And I'm curious about some of the other attitudes and impressions around a topic like wellness and what we're doing here to kind of manage stress and anxiety. And I think a big part of the reason it's become part of the conversation, we're intentionally making it part of the conversation. And Heidi, I was curious, now that everybody's in this great state of mind and perfectly relaxed, maybe we could get into some of the things that you've been thinking about, writing about in terms of where the conversations are going in terms of managing stress and anxiety in our day-to-day lives.
Sure. So I would say about 4 years ago, I was still pretty well entrenched in the law firm world and found that in that world, I was working full-time as a lawyer that year, about 4 years ago, and I found that sort of survival of the fittest mentality was still very alive and well. And the conversations during that time period a couple years ago were, I think law firm leaders were worried that having these conversations around wellness might imply that we need to reduce the rigor or somehow reduce our standards of excellence. And I think there was a little bit of fear around having these conversations. But I've been so excited and encouraged that there seems to be a shift. And I think a few examples of that are, in 2016, the American Bar Association, in conjunction with several other institutions and agencies, formed a task force on lawyer well-being. And they've accomplished a lot in a really short period of time. And one thing was issuing a report in 2017 and really a call to action for the profession and also corporate legal departments to take a look at drivers of toxicity in the profession and how we can sort of remove some of those layers and start talking about mental health and well-being for the legal profession. They issued a pledge, and I think when I last checked 2 weeks ago, there were 74 signatories to this pledge to look at well-being as a serious endeavor in the profession. And I think a lot of probably the individuals in this room are representatives of institutions that have signed on to that pledge. I kind of look at it as an athlete analogy. I think leaders in corporate culture and in the legal profession are starting to realize that just like great athletes, high-performing employees really need to look at and be self-aware about emotional, mental, and physical health and well-being. And so if we look at it sort of from an athlete perspective, we can do the same thing in our employment situations. I'll just share one quick anecdote. I work at a law school. I teach at a law school in Brooklyn Law School, and a couple weeks ago, the president of the American Bar Association came to visit us, and he was talking about well-being. And in response to that, my dean, Mary Ellen Fullerton, who I admire greatly, she sent out an email to our entire law school community, judges, lawyers, students, administrative staff, faculty, sort of establishing a task force on law student and lawyer well-being for our Brooklyn Law School community. And she put me as the point person. And I went to the gym that night. I think she sent the email out about 6:45, 7 o'clock. Went to the gym. I was getting out of the gym, and I already had 26 emails of people volunteering to be on this task force. Literally, my phone was blowing up. By the end of that week, we had 59 volunteers, and you all know how hard it is to get people to volunteer for things. 59 volunteers, judges, lawyers, administrative staff, the security guards, IT people, and then mostly students. And what it showed to me is that people are craving these types of conversations. They want to talk about this stuff, and they're not afraid to talk about how it's affected them. And they're sharing things like, okay, I can talk about eating disorders, I can talk about substance abuse, I can talk about suicide risk, I can talk about nutrition, I can talk about fitness. And people are coming forward and saying, this is what I can bring to the conversation because I need help and I want to help others. And I just think that's a huge culture shift in the way we're looking at these issues.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. Len, sitting in-house at a very large company, one that's global, and being in Silicon Valley, of course, and all these things, how do you see these conversations or the inclusive nature of all these different attributes impacting folks on kind of your side of the house, in-house and large corporations? Sure.
So actually, both at Visa and at PayPal, where I was before at Visa, this sort of wellness focus was fundamentally important for the success of the companies. We were competing, still are competing, for talent, and of course, the best talents, will want to go to the best companies, and that means, especially for millennials these days, they're looking for quality of life. We all are, right? We all want work-life balance, and so having a true, genuine focus on wellness was the only way, is still the only way to compete in this world as companies. So, for example, at Visa, just last week, my general counsel had a mandatory training for every legal and compliance person around the world, about 350 people or so, to focus on certain techniques, that a few of which I'll share later on today, because it was that important for just that group. We formed about a year and a half ago a Visa Mindfulness Club. Organically, it grew to 3 out of 4 members of our headquarters are part of that club very quickly in just a year or so. Again, as Heidi was saying, there's a very strong groundswell. So I think the executives all recognize that this is the only way that that can possibly compete as a company going forward, and in lots of different ways, being authentic as leaders is the way to bring in talent, retain talent, keep people happy and highly productive.
Yeah. Well, and so I want to go back to you, Heidi, and break it down a little bit further, especially as we think about kind of this dichotomy around introversion and extroversion, which you've thought about a lot, you've done research, you've written a lot about it. What can you perhaps make clearer to folks in the room, especially those who lead teams? We've got a lot of people in here that lead teams and might be experiencing a lot of that dynamic on their teams. How can leaders better anticipate, identify, or extract the talents of those that are not necessarily like themselves?
Sure. So I've studied a lot about the differences between introversion and extroversion, and what I realize is that our American society, we tend to lump labels onto quieter people and confuse labels. So we tend to call quieter people introverted or shy or socially anxious or aloof or not gregarious enough. But really those are all sort of different categories. And so it was really important for me to understand and then to help other people understand that there's a difference between introversion and extroversion. And that really turns around the way that individuals process information, questions, stimuli, but also the way that we rekindle energy. So extroverts, hence the name, do it externally. So it can be really quick in a meeting from the time someone poses a question to the time an extrovert starts talking, because an extrovert feels very natural sort of vetting and testing ideas out loud, whereas an introvert takes there's actually science that says we use 2 different neurological pathways in the brain. Introverts use a really long, ponderous pathway because they're going really deep to analyze the question posed, analyze, vet and test theories before they want to take it prime time, I say. So it can seem like an introvert is not participating or maybe checked out in a meeting, but really they're going extremely deep to want to get the answer correct. At the same time, introverts are also incorporating and absorbing stimuli. So I always like to use, we're in New York, so I use the Times Square example. Times Square full of stimuli. And introverts are absorbing all of that, sounds, noise, temperature, people, movement. And an extrovert can gain energy from all that. An introvert is so busy processing all that it can be energy depleting. So for leaders, in my opinion, it's really important for us to not try to force everyone to be the same. I joke that it's like trying to tell a dog to be a cat. I mean, introvert cannot just fake extroversion. And in fact, you're taking away that introvert's strength and authentic power. On the shyness and social anxiety piece really quickly, that is a completely different category, and shyness and social anxiety revolves around a fear of judgment. It can be associated with shame. That's something that I really had to understand and realize that I struggled with that a lot. And so understanding introversion, but then shyness and social anxiety is a completely separate animal really, is really important for us as individuals, but also for leaders. And what I try to encourage is for leaders to get to know really what it means to be an introvert and realize that those individuals bring tremendous assets to teams and companies and also dealing with clients. So that the science shows that introverts are very active listeners. They are deep thinkers, as I mentioned. They go very deep to try to really understand. They can absorb all those stimuli and may be seen as not participating in a meeting, but what they're really doing is synthesizing all the voices, and then often it's the introvert that at the end can come up with a creative solution that maybe others hadn't really heard in all the competing voices. Introverts can be really thoughtful writers because they ponder really carefully over words. So in a lot of our companies and our profession, all of those skills are really important. But sometimes the introvert can be overlooked because they're not the ones speaking first in the meeting or going up to shake the hand of the new client. They're kind of taking their time more. Empathy is another issue. The science also says that quieter folks tend to have heightened levels of empathy. And so at least in the legal world, even in my hard-hitting construction jobs, it was really important for us to have empathy and figure out the human component to the conflict. And that's something that introverts can really help. So I would advise leaders to really get to know the real differences between introverts and extroverts, not try to sort of force everybody into one particular box or one particular personality, understand the assets really that everybody brings to the table, help people unpack the shyness and social anxiety aspect of it. Why do we fear judgment in certain meeting dynamics or certain performance dynamics? And then also really try to listen and understand what helps people thrive. I like to joke that I loved writing my briefs in the law firm environment, but I needed to close my door. And I worked in law firms where there was a huge emphasis, keep your door open, keep your lights on, we want to know you're here. I needed to close that door, and I needed to undo the oppressive fluorescent light that was beaming down on my desk, but it irritated my boss that I wanted to do that. But I really knew that I needed that to thrive. I needed quiet, and I needed kind of the dynamic in my office that I could perform at my peak. And I could do that, but I needed to do it sort of my way.
Those are fantastic insights. Thanks so much. I want to make sure that in the few minutes that we have remaining that we actually hit on some real tips. And maybe, Len, if I could turn to you first, especially if we think about 3 tips to offer the community, especially thinking about it from the chief compliance officer's type of position and leading team dynamics and embracing individual differences, what tips can you give folks?
Sure. So there's a combination of things. One is perhaps you as people leaders creating the authentic environment, which means that you need to be very vulnerable. You need to be able to say, give me advice, give me feedback on an ongoing basis. So for example, I've done periodically with my teams sort of stop, start, continue. I go out of the room, the team gets together with HR, and they have easels. What should Leonard stop doing? What should he start doing? What should he continue doing? Then I come back in and I sort of react on the spot, and I vow or commit to changing my behavior in various ways and have them hold me honest to that. Skip levels, one-on-one meetings are really essential, right? So I have about 80 people on my team globally. I spend probably about 40% of my time at work meeting or having one-on-one calls with people to really understand and have that dialogue. But also in terms of making them feel heard, it's a combination of both really keeping in mind their selfish needs. You're always talking about what can I do to further your career? Let's have a written individual development plan. Let's make sure that I and my managers are driving forward your career in a way that's been thought out and planned. And also for my part, the active listening, always thinking about not my agenda, but it's your mic. You know, what do you want to talk about? What are the things that are of worry to you? How can I really help you? On the individual's parts, there are a few key ways to, I think, enhance their performance. One of them is through being very conscious of your peak performance hours. So we all have biorhythms, circadian rhythms during the day. We know that if, for example, you're a morning person, then maybe between the hours of 8 and 10 a.m. is when you're most effective. You want to organize all your hard work then. There are actually studies that have shown that judges will be more willing to grant parole right in the first part of the morning and then right after lunch. But if you're a prisoner going up before the judge and it's 11:30 a.m., they're hangry, or 4:30 p.m., forget it. You have, like, the studies show you have like 0 chance of getting parole granted because they're hangry, right? So be conscious when you're doing executive briefings or meeting with a client or what have you. You want to try to orient yourself around those things. Multitasking, that's a myth, right? You cannot multitask, lots of studies show, without sacrificing your efficiency. And then finally, in terms of concentration, having a very clean environment. There are studies that show that even having a cell phone in the room that is turned off will actually result in lower performance on performance tests. You want to actually have your clean desk, put on the noise-canceling headphones if you're in an open environment, anything you can do to remove distractions, because we are sort of human animals that are used to being in the jungle where we're always watching and our brain is monitoring for the cats or the tigers and the dog, whatever, the tigers and lions out there. And we're still doing that in the environments of the office. We need to simplify, focus, and you can just create an environment for yourself that allows you to focus just by removing those simple distractions. Those are just a few examples of things to be working on.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And then, Heidi, let's turn to you just for one final minute of a few tips that you can share about kind of valuing those diverse attributes.
Sure, yes. I would reiterate, too, the self-awareness, educating ourselves about the different personality types, but also picking up on Len's point about transparency, vulnerability, authenticity. In researching fear, fear really permeates a lot of our daily lives, and for leaders to really start being open about our own fears, and our own fears of making mistakes, I think we can really create an environment where if we're open about, yes, we don't want people to make mistakes in business, but mistakes are a reality, and if we can actually talk about them openly, we can prevent mistakes more, but also have protocols for helping people admit mistakes. And so I think being authentic and transparent about fear and mistake making is a huge shift that leaders can undertake in the corporate world. For individuals, I just recommend something that has really helped me to grapple with anxiety and fear in my professional world is to adopt something outside of your professional life in which you feel like, I call it swagger. So I started taking boxing lessons, for instance, and the first time I walked into that very male-dominated gym, I was terrified. But now I know if I'm in a really stressful meeting, I know, okay, I didn't pass out in a 60-minute boxing session. I'm not going to faint in this faculty meeting or in this boardroom right now. So really doing that for ourselves, but also encouraging our employees to go out there and find something, if it's 1 hour a week that's not work-related, that you can bring that swagger and confidence into your work environment, makes a humongous difference.
That's awesome. Thank you both so much for bringing your authenticity and vulnerability to the conversation. Thank you all for participating in the first ever mindfulness exercise at the Global Ethics Summit. You're all very vulnerable in that regard. I appreciate that. And again, thank you to our two speakers this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.